Hey, hello everyone. How are you all doing? Good, thank you. Yeah, tired, been a long day. I understand this conference, like, we started at 9:30, we've been still at it at 4:30, and there's still two more talks after this one. So, like, I appreciate that you're all here, that you're still awake. At least it seems like most of you are still awake. Hopefully you'll stay awake after this talk. This part of the talk, I would invite you to close your eyes, but I'm not going to risk it at this time of the day, because some of you might actually fall asleep. I would like you to imagine a world, and you don't need to close your eyes for that. I'd like to imagine a world where you understand why you're working on something. You understand its processes, you understand its dependencies, you understand who relies on it, and what exactly it is that you're supposed to be delivering. In this world, you can see the impact that your work has on your business, but also the impact that it has on your customers. And this will allow you to do stuff that you haven't thought about yet. It allows you to innovate. It allows you to take more risks. It allows you to go the extra mile. Well, that world exists, and it's called full service ownership. So in the next 25 minutes, we'll talk about full service ownership, the life cycle of a service. We're going a bit back to some of the basics and why we need this. There's no AI in this talk. I think that's an important thing to say. I'm not going to talk about anything in AI, and this is pure thought leadership process. I want you to understand why we do this and why this is important. So before, I already had a presentation. Thank you for that. I'm Daniel Afonso. I came all the way from Portugal. I'm based in this city called Coimbra, which, if you know Portugal, it's 2 hours away from Lisbon, 1 hour away from Porto. That's usually how I introduce myself, because it gives people comparison from what they know out of Portugal. And yeah, if you would like to connect with me, I'll be around after these talks as well. But if you want to connect with me online, I'm at Daniel J.C. Afonso pretty much anywhere. So let's talk about this thing that is full service ownership, shall we? Full service ownership means that people take responsibility for supporting the software that they deliver. And this is at every stage of the software / that service lifecycle. So, and this is because nowadays, every business, it's a digital business. A couple of years ago, there were a bunch of services, but then technology hit, and DevOps showed up, and now everything went online. Everything was on the cloud. Every service, every company had to reinvent themselves, and every business ended up being a digital business. Therefore, every service was now powered by technology. As users, we expect them to work flawlessly and be available most of the times, and full service ownership allows for this. Because the truth is, nowadays, it's not just our attention span that's lower. Our patience is lower as well. And what happens when an incident triggers is that your customers might not stick around for you to wait to resolve it. What instead they might be doing is they might go check a competitor's app. And that doesn't mean that you're going to lose them as customers or that you're going to lose them. They might come back, but you're going to lose one thing in that moment, and it's their trust. And the customer trust can impact your business very, very greatly. Just so you have an idea, a recent, and I'm not going to even talk about all the stuff that happened at AWS because of the US East situation, but a recent outage at a major retailer, which was a 2-hour outage, cost them around $50 million for 2 hours of being down. And let's not talk about the reputation and all of those things. That's a revenue hit that they're taking because, well, they were down for 2 hours. So we would like to change this culture, and this is why full service ownership is so important. Back then, we were outsourcing a bunch of stuff to IT. What we propose with a full service ownership is we want to reduce the number of handoffs. We don't want everything to be handed over and over and over. We want developers to code it, to build it, to own it, and to code it, to own it, and to ship it. That's what we want to do. Everyone on the service team should be empowered to do these things. Because how your company responds when incident shows up is what makes a difference when stuff hits the fan, and not to say another word. So the goal of full service ownership, and that's why we do this, is because we bring the subject matter experts in as the first responders. The goal of full service ownership is to resolve these incident time when they start. The subject matter experts are the people who have the most context with the software that they're building. They own that thing. They are the ones who are hands-on every day. So if you're bringing someone that actually has the context on what the thing that they've built has, well, then you're likely to respond faster and to recover faster than if you bring someone who has zero context, because then they would have to spend time trying to figure out what the heck is happening with that service. So speaking a bit of ROI and return of investment, because when the clock hits on the incidents, there are two very common things that we talk about. We talk about mean time to acknowledge, which is the time that it takes you to one of these responders to acknowledge the incident, and we have the mean time to recover, which is from the time the incident pops up until the time you recover. The incident goes away, to say it that way. These are two very common metrics that are associated with full service ownership journeys. And it's not just full service ownership. We all are looking at this. MTTR is one of those topics that we are always discussing, well, every single week or so. Now, I would like to dive a bit into what is this thing that I've been talking about, which is service. Because a service can be very, very broad. It can be a lot of things. For today, let's agree that all of these things are sort of a service. And the definition that we like to use at PagerDuty is, if it provides value, it's a service. It's a discrete, we can even categorize it this way: a discrete piece of functionality that provides value and that is wholly owned by a team. And this is specific because it can refer to infrastructure that is composed out of distinct services. But it can also apply to parts of monolithic code bases if you have one. With this universality in mind, this is what we find that applies to most use cases when we are defining what a service is and how it applies. Now, let's talk about what do we need when we are defining what a service is. The first step is, and most of these things can be cultural, but the first step is getting a shared understanding. Getting a shared understanding of what are the boundaries of that service, but who are the key stakeholders when we're talking about it. If there are multiple teams contributing, improving, working on that specific service, then this even becomes more important. How do you drive this alignment? Well, we start by actually defining the team who will own this service. A service, like I've said before, should be owned by the team who is maintaining it. Should be owned by the team that will be handling the on-call responsibilities for it. If you see that multiple teams are sharing this responsibility, then this is a sign that there might be a need to split that service somehow. We'll talk about monoliths in a bit. The second point is how you set up the on-call rotation for your service. So people on your team should share this responsibility. It's your responsibility of everyone to make sure that stuff is available in production and it's available when your customers need it. So create that on-call schedule, have that, the backup responders, have a shadow rotation if that's needed somehow. Make sure you have your escalation policies, all the basics that you need when you're setting up your on-call for that service. The second point is ensure that team is correctly sized. So in the early days of Amazon, Jeff Bezos set a rule, which is teams shouldn't be large enough than two pieces can fit. In that case, I've said this multiple times, I might have been a one-person team in the past, but that's a whole other discussion. The point of having small teams was to avoid the situation where people are constantly providing status updates to each other. If you have small enough teams, people have more time to actually get stuff done. When you have larger teams, you have status updates, and when you have smaller teams, you can get stuff done faster, you can innovate faster, and you don't spend a lot of time saying, okay, I have to do this, I need to align with this person, I have to do this, I have to align with this person. You just go ahead and you do it. The second point, the fourth point, sorry, I lost track of the number. is that definitions should help with problem resolution. So services should be set up granularly enough so that the members of the team can quickly identify the source of the problems. If two microservices, for instance, behave as one, and fixing something on one means fixing something on the other, then you might have a sign that there might need a merging happening, or that another discussion that needs to show up there. What about the monolith? And that's what I was talking about earlier. Well, the rule of thumb when we're talking about monoliths is, how will you address on-call for it? Usually the team that owns the monolith won't have on-call responsibilities for anything else, because usually monoliths are the source of a lot of incidents, a lot of problems. So that's the first step. But a rule and a tip that we like to give here is consider identifying different services or different functionalities on your monolith and start routing those alerts to specific teams. So that's usually something that tends to happen already. So instead of having a single team that owns the entire monolith, group it by functionalities and consider these functionalities your services. Regarding dependencies, the tip is when you're starting to do that, don't worry about it. You have enough work on your plate when handling and starting this cultural change. So leave the dependencies for when you get to a point where you actually know what a service is for you, how to work with it, how to handle its on-call responsibilities, and have this mentality nailed down. Now, let's talk about the functions that are part of a service ownership team. Full service ownership means that managing a service, like I said, is a responsibility of an entire team, but it's not just an entire team. This requires a cultural shift, and it requires an organizational backup. And it requires buy-in that come all the way up until back down. Because if you're trying to set up this mentality and you see executives at the top level don't agreeing with it, then it's not going to work out pretty well for your teams. So that's the first thing. The other point is that different companies are going to be working different, having different structures, different ways of work. What might be ops work for one team might be engineering work for others, and so forth. So what we recommend here is, and what I'm going to be talking about in the next slides, is I'm going to focus on the functions rather than the roles, because it's important that we have a standardization of what these things mean rather than who will do them. So the first role, the first function that we're talking about here, is the service documentation. There are more concerns nowadays than writing code. Who here has looked at the repository lately and just found an empty README? Okay, yeah, we've been there, exactly. And we hate when that happens because it doesn't give us instructions. It doesn't tell us where we need to go. It doesn't give us a contract. It doesn't give us the information that we need to actually use that service. We are looking at an empty place. Documentation must actually explain what your code does. Also provides a contract for anyone that might have to interact with it. Next point is, it's not just the docs. It also applies to your code. So make sure that your code is reviewed, that has all those things that we preach when we're talking about engineering best practices. Code reviews, you want to avoid single points of failure, especially if you're the single point of failure. We don't want to have the single person on the team who's the only one who knows how that code base works, because if that person leaves, you're screwed. Or you have to have a bunch of training or have AI explain that to you, whatever. Oh, see, I mentioned AI, didn't even want to mention. Oh, well. The next point is when you're talking about service documentation, it's a service name. And I could avoid speaking about this part, but I think it's such a critical thing. We, as developers, struggle with naming. Naming is hard. That's what we say in a lot of content, what we say in a lot of talks. But to be honest, it shouldn't be that hard. What if we just described stuff for what they do? I want to give you an example. I've worked in a couple of companies in the past, and I have seen at least 3 times the service Atlas. And I've seen this service in at least 3 companies that I've worked in the past years. Okay, but what does the Apollo service do? We don't know. What if instead we used the messaging service, the checkout service? Name stuff for what actually they do, because when you name them for what they do, it doesn't mean that you won't lose reference. It doesn't mean that you're going to be looking at that service 5 years after and be like, what the heck does this name mean? just to try to drive this concept home. Who here noticed that I changed Atlas to Apollo? Okay, some of you picked up on it. Good. Because that's exactly what happens in the real world. Nobody is going to remember what the heck the name was and what the purpose of it is. So that's just a bit of a neat peek that I wanted to take when talking about service. Next part of the documentation is make sure you include descriptions. Every service should clearly communicate to anyone that's reading that page what it's supposed to do. And it must answer at least these 4 questions. First one, what's the intent of that service? Second one, what does it contribute to? The third point is if it impacts the customers, how does it do it? And the fourth point is how does it deliver value to your business? Other considerations when we're talking about documentation might be things like dependencies, APIs, deployment mechanisms. These are all things that might be relevant. When we're talking about dependencies, make sure that you avoid the circular dependency situation where you have a service that depends on the service and then they're documenting all those things, and then one updates the service and then it doesn't update the other documentation. So everyone gets lost and you'd have nothing in your READMEs. So make sure that if you are listing dependencies and somehow they are updated, you have a way of tracking that part. When we're talking about APIs, list the functionalities that your customers should expect. And when I say customers, I don't mean external customers. Anyone that's using your service is your customer. I think that's important, even if it's an internal thing. When we're talking about APIs, you should have stuff there that describes what should your customers expect out of that API. Just make sure that you avoid turning this into a best practice section. You just want a clear section of this API exposes this is what it does, what it does, not. You should use this that way because this is the best thing. We want to avoid getting into that. And when we're talking about deployment mechanisms is if you have, some teams have their own ways of deploying stuff. If you have a specific thing on how you deploy your services, make sure it's listed there because when someone might be having an incident or that service might be going down and someone has to figure out how to check that, that's going to be documented. The rule of thumb that we like to follow here is describe to someone else what are the things that you need to know before starting to use your service. And use that to have your documentation. Heck, if you're having someone onboarding, that's also a great initiative for you to review how your services are being handled. Explain that new person being onboarded, and you want to figure out either it's super clear as crystal and it's working pretty well, or it's not that good, and you might need to add some improvements there. The next point to talk is, and now we're outside of the documentation, we're going into the availability bit. Because we know that no service can or will be available 100% of the time. So it's important that we have realistic expectations for what these things should mean. I won't go into details on this because of time, but there were talks today that talked about SLOs, there were talks that talked about SLIs, SLAs. This is a great way to establish expectations with your company, but also with your customers. But there's also other things that we can go into, like service tiers. Some organizations use these to manage expectations, where you have service 1, where can be the critical path services, which therefore means that these services are going to need a 24/7 on-call process. And you have tier 2, tier 3 services, where they are not on the critical path, but they provide supporting functionalities, and therefore their on-call responsibilities can be during business hours, usually for Monday to Friday. One point that I like to talk about as well is runbooks. Runbooks, just out of curiosity, who here is using runbooks or has runbooks? Okay, I love that little bit and jiggle thing. So for those of you who are not familiar with runbooks, they are the how-to guides for completing commonly repeated tasks when you're talk about certain services. When things go wrong, they are there to help you. They are the first things you should check because probably someone already documented certain steps on how to deal with that specific service, on how to replicate it. Maybe someone even automated it, which is even better. If you have a script that allows you to run a runbook, it's even better than having to go through all of these processes. A minimal runbook for every service is better than having nothing at all, because if you have at least a minimal thing, just for the things that you're going to find yourself doing more than 2 or 3 times when having to diagnose that service or when having to fix it, then it's perfect. And the next point here is when talking about product operations, because owning a service means that you are running it in production. So I won't get into a lot of details of this part. Like I said, this is the nutshell of this. But make sure that you have set up alerts, you have the basic dashboards, you have monitoring, you have all the things that should tell you that something is wrong with your service when it actually goes wrong. Now, how you do this? It depends. Some organizations have SRE giving support to service teams, others have everything in one team. The point here is you want to assure that your services are robust and reliable. Now let's talk about project management. When we're talking about project management we are extending full service ownership outside of its development circle. Because there's going to be unforeseeable circumstances when we're talking about your services. There can be things that need to happen, like postmortems that lead to maintenance, postmortems that lead to tasks that need to be prioritized into backlog. Project managers can make all of these more manageable for the teams by giving you space to do things like defining what done is, shielding the team from stress, and what we call executive swoop and poop, which is executive drops in, and he thinks he's helping, but he just messes everything up. Project managers should be there to make sure that this doesn't guarantee. Also making sure that there's a definition and people know exactly what it means to take an engineer out of whatever they might be doing to pull them into another task. And the next role that's important here is the product owner, or the product ownership part. They are responsible for communicating customer requirements. And what I mean by customer requirements is customers will tell product owners that they want stuff, but they will rarely ask for the specifics. So what do I mean by this? Well, they might ask for a feature, but if you don't have uptime, they won't be able to use that feature. They might ask for I forgot the point I was making, sorry. What I wanted to say here is customers will always ask for these three things that we have. They'll ask for uptime, performance, and security. But they won't always directly ask you for that. And this is where product owners come in. They translate these things, because if you don't have uptime, then they won't be able to use the feature. If you don't have performance, they'll leave in frustration. And if you don't have security, then their trust on you goes out of the window. That's what's important with product owners. Customers will always ask for these things, they just won't say it directly. And this is where the product owners come in to translate it. And finally, champions or leadership. We can call them whatever you want. This work for full service ownership is better and works better when you have a champion behind, where you have someone that is there to back up the team and make room in their roadmap so that they can invest in things like tech depth, defining what a service is, adjusting to these new processes that are important when adopting full service ownership. They also make sure that they help balance business priorities with the needs that the team has when going into these spaces. So I'm noticing I'm going a little low on time. So I'm going to try to make the next 17 slides fast. When we're talking about a life cycle of a service, there are three phases. There's the design phase, there's the runtime phase, and then there's the retirement phase. Whilst going with brownfield projects that already exist, is a great way to prove value for full service ownership. Greenfield projects give you a fresh start, allows you to start from the beginning without all the previous backlog, all the tech debt, all the trauma, all the things that we had before. So when we're talking about the design phase, it's important that you have three things in consideration. First, make sure that you always have your customer in mind. And with customer, I mean anyone that's using that service. Second, make sure that you have a pre-prod environment. You need to make sure that you have an environment that's as close as possible to production, so you have the exact thing working there as you have in prod, in case you need to test some stuff. And make sure that your service is product ready. And what I mean by product ready is make sure that you have all the stakeholders thumbs ups. Ideally, this happens early in the process rather than at the end. You can use shift left here, whatever. This is a point that I like to talk. Make sure to have run books, all the things that you might need to operate your service in production. Next, we talk about runtime. So you're operating this thing in production. So now your service might require improvements, might require maintenance, might require a bunch of other stuff. So make sure it's versioned. Make sure that when you're providing updates, especially breaking changes, that you communicated with customers. Two low-effort ways of doing this is by having a change log in a predictive place where everyone can find, or having a mailing list. And the third point is reliability maintenance. As you find issues, as you have incidents, make sure that you run your postmortems, that you get action items out of it, and that you improve. You don't want to keep having the same issue again and again and again and again. And finally, sunsetting. There's the point to be made between deprecation and retirement. When you deprecate something, you say, okay, this is going to be retired soon, but we're still going to be providing the security updates in the meantime, and this is the date when we want to retire it. Then you identify the customers that are actually using it so that you can measure the business impact of retiring this service, and that you have a way of letting these customers know how to offboard of that service, typically by having a migration plan or giving them a path and time. Because if you decide, oh, I'm going to deprecate this now, but we're going to retire it in 2 weeks, that's not even enough time for people to adjust. Think about the time that you take to develop a new feature. You don't know, it might depend on your organization. You don't know how it is for your customers, so you need to give them enough time. So going on some best practices, full service ownership also includes all these things: communication, compromise, commitment. If this sounds like a relationship, it is. Because you're in a relationship with your customers. If you're not in a relationship, congratulations. Now you're in a relationship with your customers. Because you're providing them value, providing them something that they rely on. Then this is a relationship. And they'll provide you with feedback. They'll provide you with improvements. There's a whole point here to be made. Things that help when approving this. So first of all, agility. So agile methodologies give space, help prevent blockers, and make sure that full service ownership becomes more manageable to adopt. Starting small. So starting small allows you to show value to executives at a low risk. So you can choose a non-critical production system to begin the definition of your service and use that as your pilot. Try all the things that we've discussed through here and then measure the baseline. One thing that you should start seeing immediately is that your MTTR, the mean time to resolution, should be lower than it was before. You should be resolving stuff faster than you were before. While Greenfield, and we talked about Greenfield versus Brownfield, while Greenfield give you the fresh start, possibly starting with a Brownfield project will allow you to get the executive buy-in and have a better way to provide value. And okay, blameless culture. There were some nods to this throughout some talks today. And one thing that I think it's very important when talking about this is mistakes happen. Everyone makes them. We all make mistakes. And I think this is the beginning of a song that I won't start now. But for teams to feel empowered and for teams to take the risk and to experiment and to start doing new things, they need to feel safe. They don't want to have that culture of, oh, something broke, it was this person. That shouldn't exist. Blameless culture is it's one of the things that has been proven to be the leading indicators in cultural safety and overperforming teams. It's because they feel safe and they know that they can innovate and thrive in this world. So to wrap up, and yeah, we're not going to have time for Q&A for my part. Practice makes perfect. Wrap up, and I have 6 slides, sorry, but we still have time. Practice makes perfect. Practice running incidents. Here I'm talking about things like chaos engineering, about game days. Get these things together. This gives you a way of figuring out all of the stuff we discussed and gives you the confidence for when real incidents show up. So for you to scale this very fast, onboarding. A great tip when you're starting to do full service ownership is to have a shadow. So have leads, teams that are starting with full service ownership, shadow a team that has been successful doing that. And after this period stops, have someone from the successful team shadow them back to help them define their service and help them adjust to this new culture. And still talking about shadows, have these people shadow on call for the teams that are successful. The goal is to have, you can make them as a shadow as a shadow rotation. So you basically just add an additional responder that when the main person on call is paged, they are paged as well, and they sit in as a listener, and they listen. And the idea is that they have experience enough, so when it's their time to respond, they know how to do it. And the last point, and this is really the last point before summary, practice empathy. This takes patience, this takes understanding. These is skills that we need to practice and grow on. And they just don't happen from one day to the other. We tend to forget how hard it is for us to learn things. We forget that because we have experienced the beginning, we remember the end, but we forget all the struggle we went in the middle. So be kind to everyone always. So to close out, in a nutshell, it puts you in control of all of these steps. So it does require a cultural shift, and it's something that won't happen in a day, because, well, Rome wasn't built in a day. But in the end, your teams will feel more empowered, resilient, and closer to your customers than ever. So that was my time. Thank you so much, everyone.